Welcome to In Pinecrest. I'm Guido Nguanzo. We're coming to you live from the studios at Community Newspapers. My guest today was elected to the Pinecrest Village Council in 2016 and reelected overwhelmingly in 2020 to a second term. Welcome, the Honorable Anna Hokemer.
Thank you very much, Guido. You pronounced my name beautifully.
We're off to a good start, council member. So tell us a little bit about your background. You're from Michigan. You lived in Ecuador for many years, and now you're an elected official in South Florida. Tell us about your journey to Pinecrest.
Yeah, it was a bit of an interesting journey. I was born and raised in suburban Detroit, went to undergraduate school at Northwestern in Chicago, and I studied comparative literature and focused on Latin American literature. And so when I was 21 years old, I decided to go to Ecuador to do a master's degree in Latin American literature. And a few weeks after I got there, I met this charming Ecuadorian man, ended up marrying him, and lived there for 15 years. All three of my children were born in Ecuador. I was a middle school math teacher down there. And then in 2009, we moved to Miami. Mm-hmm. And I didn't know anything about Miami. It was almost like moving to Timbuktu, right? And so I'm a fairly methodical person, and I knew I needed to be 45 minutes from the airport max. I had three little kids. They were 10, 6, and 4. And so I needed a yard. And I'm a great believer in public school. And I'm also fairly frugal. And if I could avoid paying for private school for my three kids, I wanted to do that too. And when you put that into a search bar, there's a single neighborhood in Miami-Dade that comes up, and that's Pinecrest. So from Quito, called a realtor, rent me a house. We rented a house. We moved in. And within a couple of months, we realized we were home. We'd found the community that worked for us. And we've been here now 12 years.
Great. And when you did get to Pinecrest, you did become involved in the PTSA.
Correct.
And other issues. How did that inspire you to run for the village council?
Well, if you told me that I was going to end up being involved in local politics 15 years ago, I would have told you I was insane. I was a middle school algebra teacher. I was a mom. I was very involved in children's lives and in educational issues. But when I got to Florida, my original intention had been to become certified to be a teacher in Florida and go back to work until I learned what public school teachers in Florida make. At which point the finances behind that decision didn't seem to work out. And so I crafted a life for myself where I was working for the family business part-time. I was stay at home part-time, but advocacy and PTSA, advocacy and public education issues just seemed to fit my particular skills and backgrounds and interests. I was bilingual, which meant I could talk to sort of everybody that was in the community. And I found it to be an incredibly fulfilling, but challenging, and I think challenging is the key for my personal psychology, a way to engage with the world around me. And when I became the president of the PTSA at Palmetto Senior High School, which was, I tell everyone, the hardest job I've ever had, incredibly challenging, incredibly difficult, huge number of hours, huge amount of fundraising involved. I had to interact with all of the local cities that our students lived in. I had to learn to interact with Miami-Dade County. I had to learn to interact with the public school board, the fourth largest public school system in the country. And I started attending the meetings. I started watching very closely the conversations. I started looking at the budgets, where a lot of people don't realize the sausage is really made on what happens in our public sphere. And I realized, I get this. I understand how the money works. I understand how the conversations happen. And, there's a moment at which, when you have a background in advocacy, where you stop wanting to ask other people to vote the right way on things that are important to you. You want to vote the right way on things that are important to you. And the only way to get yourself in that position is to run. So in 2016, having no idea that I was about to run my first election in the midst of the historic Clinton-Trump scrum that was coming upon us, I tell people I didn't know any better, and so I filed and I ran.
Great. And you won, and as I said, you were reelected to a second term in 2020. Before we move on, you mentioned you went to college at Northwestern.
I did.
And I recently learned a fascinating tidbit about you, is that you can replace a face mask on a football helmet. Tell us a little bit about that.
I can, actually. While I was at Northwestern, I was one of the equipment managers for the Northwestern University football team, which is just as disgusting as you think it is. I washed the uniforms. I've washed, I washed an awful lot of dirty jock straps in the huge industrial washing machines. But I had to, fix the cleats and replace the face mask and do what I could. When we had issues with the pads and things like that, and it was an experience entirely divorced from anything I'd done before and entirely divorced from anything I did since, but it's great for cocktail parties.
Well, arguably it could have prepared you for politics.
It could have.
We're finally returning to some normalcy, and the great hope is through this summer and by fall, life will return to what we knew before the pandemic. You yourself had COVID-19.
I did.
What did the village do right, and what could it have done better during the pandemic?
In retrospect, the village was one of the first government entities down here to recognize what was coming. I think we were the first municipality to declare a state of emergency in Miami-Dade County. I think the county maybe did it 12 hours before we did, which means, that was already being worked on. We had now that I look back on it, brilliantly set up outdoor emergency meeting with council, with the staff, with the head of all of our departments, with our chief of police in the Banyan Bowl at Pinecrest Gardens, which I called in on because I had a sore throat, and at that point nobody knew.
Right.
Both
you and the manager had to call in for the same reason.
And we were all being very, very careful. We got a lot of initial pushback from people that we were overreacting, and we were, kind of taking this a little too seriously. I don't know if everybody remembers, but this was going to be over in 3 or 4 weeks, right? I mean, the kids were still thinking about prom and graduation. And we were one of the few municipalities to say, no, this is bigger than you think it is. And we are going to have to make interesting, novel, and brave decisions in order to lead the community through it. And I think that spirit of bravery in the face of not necessarily clear information and clear instructions from the powers that be served Pinecrest well. We had a much lower infection rate than a lot of other communities, but we have a well-informed populace who generally believes in science and is willing to do what it takes for the good of the community, and that worked to our advantage. But we were not timid in the face of something that frankly scared a lot of people. The flip side, looking back on it, we were slow adopters on the technology. We still have trouble, for example, getting the mics necessarily to work at the council meetings when people stand up and talk, and people who are watching online, can't really quite hear what somebody's saying. So the technological part of it is something I know we've been working on and talking about for months and months at this point. And we need to step up and make sure that we are taking advantage of all of the interesting, new, and innovative ways that we can make sure people feel comfortable engaging with government. We will do that, and we'll get better at it.
Yeah, and the council actually had a virtual council meeting a few days after that emergency meeting, and it was one of the first in the state to do so, even before the governor issued the emergency order. So we've always, been leaders when it comes to technology. Is it glitchy sometimes? It's glitchy sometimes. And you're right. We keep working at it to try to keep improving it.
I will tell you, I had never heard of Zoom before you sent me that link and said, we're going to use this thing. I don't know whether the other council members did, but given our inability to mute ourselves and turn our cameras on, I would say no. But we were willing to try, and really did the best we could.
We absolutely did. And the village, I think, also benefited from the fact that Mayor Cordino was the point person for the Miami-Dade County League of Cities on the entire pandemic.
Correct.
And so the village benefited from his knowledge. He puts out a weekly statement, still does to this day, with the numbers. And I think that messaging was also an important part.
I don't think that we can undersell how important Mayor Cordino's role over the past year has been, not just for Pinecrest, but for Miami-Dade County. And he doesn't really toot his own horn. I'm the village's board member on the League of Cities. He's obviously the executive board member, and just last week was sworn in as its next president. He occupied a key role in all 34 municipalities being able to coordinate with the county on the first time ever, getting the municipalities regular contact with the county and a seat at the table to discuss really, really important issues, not just of public health, but of funding, of stimulus, of CARES Act. He was the one who was in charge of keeping the data, right? You find the most trustworthy, reliable, competent person, and that's the person who's in charge of keeping the facts. And that's who Mayor Corradino was on the inside of those meetings. He was engaged with the league and with the county 3, 4, sometimes 5 times a week, and exercising calm, rational, careful, thoughtful judgment that benefited this entire county, not just Pinecrest. He never toots his own horn, but as somebody who watched it from the inside, I think we need to start telling people what a gem we have there.
Yes, the village is certainly very lucky in that regard. Let's talk a little bit about water.
Water.
Last week, the village council seemingly finally resolved one of Pinecrest's enduring issues. Predates the incorporation of the village, and that's completion of the county's potable water system. There's still about 700 homes in Pinecrest that, believe it or not, rely on wells for their potable water. With overwhelming support from those people, the council has moved forward, and with the use of federal monies. What does this mean for the village of Pinecrest?
Well, it's funny. I said to somebody, it feels like we're coming to the end of a 25-year pregnancy, right? So yes, we're happy that it's happened, but mostly happy that it's over. Look, this has been a conversation we've had for a long, long, long time. Many moving pieces, lots of different opinions. Everybody in the community has a different level of financial skin in the game. But for these last 700, having gone through, the bond referendum, having thought very carefully about creating special taxing districts, having found that they have wells that are failing from salt water, or that they have levels of arsenic that concern them, finishing the potable water system is the safety net that's going to bring Pinecrest into the 21st century. We understand there are certain individuals who are very happy on their wells and they don't want to come off their wells. That's great. They'll have 10 years from the time the potable water line is installed near their home to connect. And it looks like we're getting some great cooperation from our current county commissioner, Raquel Regalado, on even extending that window to 20 years. So hypothetically, anybody who says, look, I want to stay here until I die on my well should be able to do so. But if your well fails, if you have saltwater intrusion, if you have contamination that basically renders your home uninhabitable, it is not a quick thing to decide to run a water main down your street, right? That water main needs to be there for us, because all of those threats, all of those existential threats are not hypothetical. They're happening. They're happening in the coastal communities. They're happening in Pinecrest. We have the studies that show that they're happening, and everyone needs to have the ability to connect into that system as a matter of, existential welfare in the 21st century.
It's a quality of life issue.
It's not just a quality of life issue. If you are living in the holes of those donuts and the well fails, where will you live? Right. Where will you live? We want you to be able to live in Pinecrest.
It's certainly a major accomplishment for the village to be able to resolve this.
We have another hearing on it in June. I would be surprised if it doesn't pass. Frankly, all 5 council members co-sponsored the item last month. That's generally a sign that everybody's pretty much on board with what's going on. The feedback from the properties who will be under the special assessment is about 15-1 positive. That's rare. One of the reasons why I think they're quite accepting of the special assessment is that, number one, the vast majority of the cost is going to be paid out of the federal monies that came from the American Rescue Plan. But number two, The council and our community have been having an ongoing conversation about this for 25 years. We have fleshed out all of the scenarios. Everybody who's involved understands what the options are and understands there will never be a less expensive way to do this for those homeowners. That this is really, I mean, if they were to choose to pay for it up front for $5,000, they will have fixed $1 million problem.
Right. And that special assessment is going to be about $360 a year for about 25
for about
years.
20 years, and then they'll have the opportunity to pay upfront if they choose to. And again, that is a very reasonable cost. I think most homeowners recognize to solve a big problem for their private property.
And many of the speakers at the public hearing last week told you they're happy to pay it to resolve this issue.
I think Councilmember Abbott was keeping track, and there were 54 speakers, and 50 of them said yes, please.
Correct.
I don't know that I've ever heard anybody, when you talk about giving them an assessment or a tax, come out 95%. Correct. Yes, please. I would like to pay this money.
Well, congratulations, because that's really having been here in Pinecrest for 25 years. I've seen this issue. You know, I've seen how this movie turns out, and this time it turned out differently.
You were a doubter.
I was.
Let's not deny it.
So,
you were a doubter.
You know, both the manager and the council really have accomplished something big with this. Yeah. You mentioned earlier you were a math teacher.
I was, yeah.
And you're sort of the point person on the council when it comes to budget. How are Pinecrest's finances doing?
Pinecrest finances are in really great shape. I think one reason they're in great shape is because we've had pretty good councils over the years, and pretty careful councils over the years. Pinecrest has, a very low debt burden. We're very, very careful not to overextend ourselves. Our reserves are very healthy. Every time we think we need a little bit more for that next hurricane, we put a little bit away. We budget very, very tightly. There's very little wiggle room. And we keep our millage rates as low as humanly possible, as low as we can, to provide the level of service we want to provide, right? Because there is a philosophy of government which takes root and is very popular among some people that says, look, provide the worst possible government that people will tolerate, right? Just one level above where they start to shriek and scream about how bad the services are. We don't think about it that way. We think about providing the absolute best government we can afford. That might be the same number, but it creates a huge difference when you're thinking about strategic budgeting, your fiscal year budgeting, your long-term planning, and how you manage cash and how you expose yourselves to risk. So I'm very, very comfortable with where Pinecrest finances are right now. Although behind the scenes, I've been working a bit with the manager, because we are a tight, well-run organization. A lot of the opportunity to get even more, even better at what we do is by nibbling around the edges, right? We're at the stage where 1% or 2% here or there in certain budgets can really benefit us. So, we're looking at inflationary trends. We're looking at what things are tracking higher than the rate of inflation, making sure we understand why. All of those sorts of internal tweaks that keep an organization tight and efficient is what we're able to focus on now, as opposed to running around, as many communities have to do, putting out fires and dealing with crises. So I'm very happy with Pinecrest finances.
Good. And that budget process is already underway.
Mm-hmm.
The manager will submit her recommended budget in July to the council. Mm-hmm. Council traditionally has an August budget workshop. The manager has several town halls, and then the budget hearings are in September. So that's coming up, and it's a very transparent process.
Absolutely. And it's, anybody can, watch, they can live stream it. It's not scintillating unless you're really one of these finance dorks that loves it. But I have been known, even before I was elected, I would sit and let it run while I was cooking dinner. 90% of it didn't matter to me one way or the other, but boy, that 10% that mattered to me was something that caught my eye. So I encourage everybody to listen, even if it's after the fact, and then send us an email and say, hey, I noticed you talked about this thing or this other thing. This matters to me. This is what I think you should do about it, we really do read those emails and respond to them.
Okay. In the days following the shooting at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School, you gave one of the most powerful speeches I've seen at a village council meeting. And you implored for action from our state, federal leaders on something. Something has to happen. Has anything happened? Has anything changed?
No. I mean, the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas was an intensely frightening experience for Pinecrest in particular, because our communities are so linked. Many people I know in Pinecrest grew up in that part of the state. People have family that live there. Some of our kids knew some of those kids from camp. So there was a lot of a very raw personal emotion in it. I'm still the mother of a high school student. At the time, I was the mother of a high school student. And there was an existential dread that overcame me, particularly as somebody who had just come off having been the PTA president at the high school. In reflection, one of the things that I recognize and I try and explain to my community, which is an affluent community, which is a well-educated community, which is a community that can often protect itself from the worst parts of our society because we have the financial resources to do so. The terror of gun violence that burst through the walls of Pinecrest and Parkland in the Stoneman Douglas shooting have been terrors present in other communities for generations. Communities that have less socioeconomic development advantages, communities of color, they have been living that terror for a long, long time. And what galvanized many people in Pinecrest and in some of the more connected and well-known wealthy communities in Florida was the idea, hey, wait a minute, now our kids aren't safe either. That's a hard thing to grapple with as someone who tries to be ethical and tries to be caring towards others, to have your blind spot so powerfully revealed to you. So while nothing really has changed on the state or federal level, we get lots of thoughts and prayers, and somebody wanders into Aventura Mall and shoots people up, and that's just one of the things that happens in the news cycle, and everybody is horrified for a few days and moves on. I have seen people and met people in the aftermath of some of these shootings, particularly, for example, Fred and MJ Wright, who live in Pinecrest, who lost their son Jerry in the Pulse shooting, become inspirational advocates for common sense gun control, not banning guns, not terror tactics, not anything more than let's talk common sense about why our children can't go to school or can't go to the mall or can't go to the movies without the real possibility of being gunned down by a lunatic. So whenever I feel desperate and depressed, I look at MJ and Fred wearing their Moms Demand Action t-shirts, and I listen to them advocating for change and not giving up. And I feel inspired to continue to tell people what we're living through as a society isn't normal, and it doesn't have to be this way. There are ways to fix it, and we need to keep talking about it and not give up.
Okay. In a 2016 interview that actually I conducted shortly after you were elected to the Pinecrest Council, which we did that interview at Pinecrest Gardens, one of the things we talked about was your vision for making Pinecrest Gardens an outdoor classroom. Flash forward, we're now doing the Upper Garden project. How is this making that vision a reality? And tell us a little bit more about this big project that's going to be a big change at Pinecrest Gardens.
Yeah, Pinecrest Gardens was always a fascinating space to me. I never really got it because I didn't live here when it was Parrot Jungle. To me, it was just this kind of odd building over there full of interesting stuff. It took me a long time to understand what made it unique. And what's happened over the past few years is that Pinecrest Gardens' educational component has grown and diversified. So we now have an education coordinator who works with kids, elementary school kids, little kids, but we also have our horticulturalist who's giving classes to adults about plants and gardening and all the different things that we who love nature and green things want to learn about. We have arts education happening there in ways we didn't through Carola Bravo's interesting initiatives, through Xavier Cortada, our artist in residence, who's, yes, creating art, but he's created an educational component to take that art out into the community from Pinecrest Gardens and use the resources. The Upper Gardens project is fascinating in that what it is able to do is fully realize, outside of the historical context of Pinecrest Gardens, this new mission for the facility. It's the only part of the gardens that isn't historic, which means to some extent you can do with it what you like. It needed serious intervention. It was crumbling. It wasn't ADA compliant. The jungle gym was something that looked like it was going to give your kids lockjaw. This was not something that we could allow to just sit there. It needed a massive intervention. But when we started talking about how we were going to bring this into the new vision of Pinecrest Gardens as having an educational component, we realized, number one, it's the place where we can talk to families, and we can particularly talk to families with young children, which is why it's going to have a sensory garden, which is why it's going to have a new space in it that is air conditioned and enclosed so that you can have classes and activities in a space that's climate controlled. But it also allowed us to grapple with the idea that we wanted to create a space where all children and all families of all abilities could come and learn and experience Pinecrest Gardens, rather than creating some place that was good for people in wheelchairs or good for people who might have sensory differences or be neuroatypical, right? Some segregated spot somewhere else. Why don't we create a space which is attractive to everyone, which is everyone wants to participate in, and then fascinatingly is designed in such a way everyone can? And that opened up a huge and innovative project that I think is going to blow people away, not just people who have kids who are neuroatypical or who might have physical or intellectual disabilities, but people who have normal kids and realize those kids are just attracted to the amenities, to the play spaces, to the programming, to the new petting zoo as everybody else. It will truly be a spot where we can teach and learn and engage with children of all ages and their families all together in a natural way.
Yeah, and it's going to be a really just fantastic project. I saw some photos on Friday of some of the elements that are being built for it, and it's going to be phenomenal.
They're beautiful, and you could have done it on the cheap. You could have done it plastic, straight out of the box, nothing special. Why the village would want to bring that kind of low quality items and amenities into what is the jewel of our community never made any sense to me.
Yeah, it's really going to be great. Mm-hmm. Okay. After last week's vote on the water issue, you made a statement on the record that this doesn't end the village's work, that the work continues. What do you see in the horizon in terms of upcoming issues and projects?
Pinecrest is moving into a new phase. We used to be kids and teenagers who were defining ourselves, trying to figure out who we were. That was Pinecrest from birth to 25. And now we're becoming adults. And our role is to figure out who we are compared to other people, who we are with the rest of the county, who we are as neighboring municipalities. How do we work on regional issues like transportation, like septic to sewer, like sea level rise, like the county system of pathways and parks and bicycle access? How do we as a mature community become part of a growing, fascinating, interesting, creative mature community around us. And it's a little bit more cerebral, and it requires a heck of a lot more good external politics, because we're going to have to create good relationships with all the other government entities around us. But it will be rich, and it will make our lives better to engage with the world around us.
Councilmember, as always, it's a pleasure. Thank you very much for joining us. We'd like to thank our friends here at Community Newspapers for hosting us, and we'll see you in Pinecrest.